Why would an industry-leading tech brand keep a full-time historian on staff? Well, when you have 175 years of history, you don't just leave those files in a basement somewhere. You use them to learn more about the past, present, and future of not only the company itself, but of the entire tech world. I'm C. Scott Brown, and today we're going behind the scenes with Corning corporate archivist Michelle Cotton. We're going to find out how Corning ended up working on Thomas Edison's original light bulb, helped build a television prototype first showcased at the 1939 World's Fair, and how one of its very first patents transformed the railroad industry during the American Industrial Revolution. Corning's legacy isn't just glass, it's the tech that built the modern world.
It's about the company's legacy and what comes next.
Okay, Michelle, take us back to the beginning. How did it all start?
In 1864, Amory Houghton Sr., who is the founder of Corning, bought Brooklyn Flint Glass. It was a specialty glass business. Most of the buildings in Brooklyn during that era were wooden structures. And of course, if you're making glass, you're talking about having furnaces with molten glass exceedingly hot in them. So it's really easy to start a fire. Brooklyn Flint Glass essentially burned down from a serious fire. The Houghton family really needed to make a decision about what their path was forward. Did they rebuild in Brooklyn? Did they decide to go to a different location? Did they get out of glass making altogether? And by chance, a Corning, New York businessman named Elias Hungerford, he had designed a set of glass window blinds and had patented them. Elias Hungerford invited Amory Houghton to come to Corning, New York, and to talk a little bit about the potential of a partnership making the blinds.
Partnering up to make glass blinds is a solid start, but moving an entire business 250 miles in the 1800s seems like a risky move. So, what was the real pull? Why Corning, New York?
There were a couple of things that were really attractive to moving to Corning. One was the fact that there was a lot of land available. It was not overly expensive, much less than you would pay for additional land in Brooklyn. And then finally, there was wonderful options for transportation. You could use the Chemung River, and so you could ship raw materials in, you could ship finished goods out. This river was extremely important to our company. In 1868, when the decision was made to relocate from Brooklyn to Corning, New York, all of the company's equipment and inventory were loaded on barges, which we believe actually landed on this spot. And Corning, after they moved here, actually continued to use this river for many, many years to ship raw materials in and then to ship finished goods out. Well, after moving to Corning, New York, again, the economy was not the best and the company was struggling. Do you leave glass making altogether, or is there some way that you can find a product line where you can get a more stable footing? So the first was a relationship with the railroads and developing several product lines that the railroads were looking for. If you had the railroads as a customer, that was key. Railroads were a primary form of transportation in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th century. And the region that Corning is located in was a railroad hub. Typically, lantern lenses would have striations on the outside of the lens. And so naturally, you would get mud, or in the winter, ice and snow that would build up in those striations. And so you couldn't tell, again, what the color of the lens was. So Corning came up with the idea through one of the founding family's members. It was actually the son of the founder, Charles, who came up with the idea of putting those striations potentially on the inside of the lens. Another huge breakthrough, and actually that was one of the first patents that Corning ever received. So this is a Corning designed lens. You might remember we talked about the fact that the striations for the Corning lenses, the semaphore lenses, are going to be on the inside of the lens, and the outside should be smooth. And you can see that this is totally smooth on the outside. And if you look closely, the striations are going to be on the inside of the lens.
So, it's one thing to say you're an old company, but entirely another to say you invented the glass envelope for the original light bulb.
Thomas Edison, of course, as I'm sure everyone knows, developed the electric light bulb. He primarily had the filament and needed some sort of a casing for the light bulb. Glass seemed to make absolute sense. Corning formed a partnership with Edison in the 1880s and started manufacturing the glass for Edison's light bulbs by hand. Of course, that was a relatively slow, tedious process. So Corning improved that a bit by starting to use molds for their light bulbs. But still, you were talking about a situation where you weren't developing that many light bulbs during the course of a day. These are all hand blown, and one of the reasons you can tell that is because you have this little piece sticking out. We call it the pig's tail. And so you know that this was a blown glass ornament. It might have been strictly blown with the blowpipe, or it could have been one that was blown into a mold. But these are the early Edison light bulbs. We're getting into a time frame during the 1880s, 1890s, where more buildings were becoming electrified. And so there was more and more of a need for light bulbs. Corning took that as a cue to start looking at some options to be able to mass produce light bulbs. The ribbon machine was really looked at as one of the first examples of mass production in the United States.
Okay, we've covered the railroad lanterns and the glass envelopes for the light bulb, but what else was happening in the early 1900s that truly propelled the company forward?
The third product that really brought Corning to profitability in the early part of the 20th century was tubing. Initially, just like light bulbs, we were doing the production by hand. That's fine, but unfortunately you start getting glass twisting and dipping, and you're just not getting a good quality product. But there was so much potential in making tubing, particularly for thermometers during that era. Well, at this point, we're talking about generation number 3 of the founding family. That would be Alonson Houghton and Arthur Houghton. Knowing there was potential in that tubing product line, Arthur decided to go visit some glass makers in Europe and take a look at some of the processes that they were using. And he happened to run across some instances where glass makers were doing something called drawing glass, basically taking a mechanism and pulling the glass so that it didn't twist. And that is exactly what Corning did. They developed a technology called the updraw, patented it, and built a structure around the equipment called the Little Joe Tower. So behind me is the iconic Little Joe Tower. Well, the Little Joe Tower was built in 1912. It started producing tubing in 1913. And it was used actively by Corning to draw tubing until 1973. And at that point, it was decommissioned in favor of newer technology. We are a technology company. And we value the fact that we not only develop the products that we manufacture and sell, but we also have developed a lot of the technology that we use to make those products. And Little Joe is a great example of that.
Remember that TV prototype I mentioned earlier? To see where that started, Michelle took us back to 1939, specifically the World's Fair. Think of it as the original CES, where the future was first put on display. I know I definitely would have been there.
1939, there was a World's Fair that was held in New York City. One of the things that you want to do in a World's Fair is not only help people understand who you are as a company, what you're doing now, but show them some of the latest innovations, things that they can expect coming soon. There was also something called the House Made of Glass. It was almost like a house of the future. It really brought a lot of Corning's products to prominence. And we also did something brand new in conjunction with RCA. So RCA was just developing the first televisions that would really be commercially available to anyone. And of course, part of that television is a glass screen called a cathode ray tube in order to see the picture. And so Corning made that cathode ray tube for RCA's 1939 television that was first introduced at the World's Fair. Television has been a long-term product for Corning, and that was really almost the start of it. That was the first time that people actually could see a TV and how it worked and know that they could probably afford to buy one. If you've got a flat screen TV in your home, more than likely the glass was made by Corning. And the interesting part of this too is Corning developed the technology. That was not unusual for Corning. Historically, we still do that today.
As we were digging through Corning's archives for this video, one thing kept surfacing again and again: the way Corning told its story. Decades before brand storytelling was even a thing. When you look back at those early 1900s ads, the tagline really stands out.
Corning means research in glass. So memorable, and with that catchphrase, you always saw that Little Joe symbol. Everybody would associate Little Joe with Corning.
Speaking of Little Joe, I've heard quite a few people in Corning tell me they are related to the person depicted there. So, what's the real story?
Who is Little Joe? Who was the model for that gaffer that is that symbol today? And so it's just natural to hope that maybe it was your relative that symbol was based on. We know from the documentation in our archives that we actually adapted that symbol from a company that Corning acquired called the Macbeth Evans Company.
That's Michelle Cotton, Corning's official corporate archivist. It's not every day that I get to meet someone who holds the key to a company's memories. It's stories like these that show why understanding your history is so important. Corning hasn't been around for 175 years by accident. It's constantly looking to its past to help guide its future. In fact, one of Corning's most famous products was created from a past failure. But I'll touch on that more in a future episode. I'm C. Scott Brown. Thanks so much for watching.